All right, welcome. So this is Tall Tavern. I've got a guest today, and Christopher, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and what tabletop role-playing game creations you're working on?
Hi, my name is Christopher Helton, and I'm a game designer and editor. I've worked for companies like Gallant Night Games, Battlefield Press, Outland Entertainment. My current game is called Action Heroes, and it's actually just came out last week after a successful Kickstarter through Outland Entertainment.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Um, Very cool. Well, what was your inspiration for kind of like making a career of this, or getting this onto Kickstarter? Did you have like a boring office job before and then got into this, or has this always
Um,
been where you worked?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I've had boring office jobs in the past, but for um, the last 10, 15 years or so, I've worked in the industry at various positions and at various varying degrees of economic self-sustainability, I guess would be the nice way of saying it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I think this is a struggle that many of us
yeah.
can resonate with. Um,
Uh,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'd say I've worked it kind of on like both sides of things. So I've worked as a writer on a couple of websites writing about gaming and doing reviews and news coverage and that sort of thing. And after a few years of that, I decided that I wanted to kind of transition back into doing more design work. So that's what I've been doing the last few years.
Yeah, I think this industry is notorious for not being high paying.
No,
Gaming in
yeah.
general, tabletop role playing gaming specifically. Um, can you talk a little bit about why you were willing to take the big pay cut to do the work that you do?
Well, a lot of it, particularly in the last few years, has been a matter of kind of needing, I guess, flexibility in what I do in out in the real world. Um, a few years back, my mom took sick, and I am kind of her primary caregiver, and I needed something that would let me kind of drop things suddenly and deal with health issues with her rather than um, you know wait till I got off work or whatever. So that it those so it gives me something to do with myself and kind of make some money.
Yeah,
So, but I mean, and in the last years, that's been um, it's funny because I was making a lot more money when I was writing about games than I do writing games. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's I don't know if this is a saying or not, but
yeah,
like you get paid more to be an art critic than an artist.
yeah. But I gave that up because it with the state of the world and the internet, it became really stressful.
Yeah,
So um, I had a publisher threaten me with a defamation suit for reporting about his activities at a convention that he and his company admitted to him doing. Um, I went through just ridiculous levels of harassment from people for reporting on things going on. And yeah, it got to the point where I was like, I'm willing to take a dramatic pay cut just so that my stress level goes down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, nothing is more important, I think, and then, family and health and how you get to spend the limited amount of time you have on this planet.
yeah, yeah. So that I'm glad I was able to kind of bring things down right at the beginning and set the tone
Yeah.
for the rest of this conversation. So
So, well, I'm sorry to hear about your mother. Actually in a similar situation myself, which led me, moving away from San Francisco and like the kind of high paying tech job thing. And so I get it. And I think more importantly, really respect it. Not everyone would make the choices that you have made or have the kind of courage to do what you do. Um, I was hoping to shift gears a little bit and talk about how you think of the major tabletop role playing game companies and specifically Wizards of the Coast, like what you like about them, and also what you think that maybe independent creators are doing or could be doing better or differently that Wizards of the Coast is not doing or can't do.
um, well, I'm not really I'm not really a huge D&D fan. I've been gaming for a long time, and I started gaming in '79 when I was 11. And back then, you didn't really have much in the way of choice. It was, pretty much D&D and AD&D. I mean, there were other games, but I lived in a small town, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and those games might as well have just been, you know, something somebody made up because our game buying choices were the Walden books at the mall and the KB toys at the mall. And if it wasn't in one of those two places, it didn't exist. So I spent a long. I'm not really a huge fan of fantasy, and that's a big part of why I don't really connect with D&D because it's fantasy. And I've always been I'm more of a science fiction fan, a big fan of comic books and things like that. So, excuse me. The I think I spent my first like 5 or 6 years of being a D&D fan as trying to figure out how the hell I was going to get out of playing D&D. And once I started being able to get access to newer games that weren't that, like, one of my first non D&D games was Call of Cthulhu. And once I started playing that, I just never really looked back. And I'll revisit it from time to time, but um, I'm just I it's I mean, I get it. Most of my friends are big D&D fans, and I have no problem with it in and of itself. But it's just not a game for me, which means, luckily, that a lot of the big drama that comes with Wizards of the Coast tends to kind of flow over me because I'm like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. So
Yeah.
until it turns into something really huge like this, and like the AP starts reporting on things like the AI art story,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, now it's something I have to pay attention to because the the media is actually paying attention to this stuff now. So
But you're in that second bracket of like non D&D players, and if it's news big enough for non D&D players, then you're
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And it's and whenever something like that comes up, one of the first things I think actually is usually, boy, I'm glad I'm not in the media anymore because it just anyway.
Yeah.
but but yeah, so but getting to your second point of what do I think that indie creators can do that Wizards doesn't, and I think a lot of other larger publishers, people like Paizo, the Chaosium,
Cobalt Press, or
yeah,
yeah,
the the thing that I think that indie designers and publishers can and should do better that differentiate them from those people is that I think we need to see more author's voice in role-playing games, and that's where I think that the indies can do a really good job and should do a really good job at, because a lot of the big corporate game projects are designed by committee. So when you've got 3, 4, 6 people working on a project, it makes it harder. You don't really have an individual voice.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when you're like with my Action Heroes game, I wrote it. I wrote it. I designed it. I play tested it, and so I tried to write it in a tone that I thought was my voice. And I think that's something that's kind of hard to explain to designers, because voice isn't something that you see in role-playing games much, because most role-playing games are designed fairly dryly, and we're still kind of I think we've moved away from it, but we're still a lot of games are still being written like they're instruction manuals rather than kind of the doorway into creating worlds or stories, or what I think role-playing games can be at their root. And I think a part of transitioning from the manual to the it's just game. There's not really a term for it, but part of the transition, I think, is authors finding their voices in what they write, and figuring out how to make a game sound more like they're having a conversation with the end user, the game group, the GM, the player, whomever, than just an info dump for like 200 pages.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I think that's a very artful description. It makes me think of, okay, if I were to pick up Action Heroes, there'd be an empty chair where kind of you're metaphorically sitting in it and participating in the group, versus here are the mechanical underpinnings. You all go and write the story. Not to say like one approach is better or worse. It's just
right.
It's different. Yeah, very different.
Yeah, and I think that is. I personally think that that's where we will see kind of the next evolution, is when you read like a novel. My background is in literature, which is I studied the literature in college, and 4 years of kind of grinding all that into me. It kind of gives me that kind of approach. But it's like when you pick up a novel by somebody that knows what they're doing, you know that you're going to get that author's voice, and if you've read other works by that author, you kind of know what to expect out of that work. And I just think that's something we need to see more of in role-playing games. So
yeah, it's hard to kind of get that feel if it's very depersonalized, and it's hard to not make it depersonalized if you're trying to design for everyone, not for someone. And if the designers are a team or a group rather than kind of a single strong voice. That makes sense. I'm curious, kind of going a bit off script here, but uh,
I do
that's
that to people.
yeah, punk man. You should have given me a warning that you're gonna go off the rails. Who would have thought a tabletop role playing game person is going off the rails? Um,
Yeah, didn't see that coming.
yeah. Do you have like similar perspectives to art as you do to writing? Like, how would you feel about cover art on a RPG book that wasn't attributed to an author or a artist, I should say?
Just to make sure I understand what you're asking, if that the art. You're asking me, should the art be attributed to the author, or?
No, I was curious. So, oftentimes, artwork created by humans,
Mhm.
not by AI, is not attributed to an actual artist. And this can be companies doing like cost cutting, or just finding a particular style and kind of like outsourcing it, or over, whatever it is to be able to get the artwork done very, very cheaply.
Yeah.
Um, and I was wondering if the thoughts that you had in terms of there not being a particular voice or style, or like a recognizable pattern in written words, if you felt like the same was true with like an artistic style being
Okay.
unable to be
Um.
conveyed if
Oh,
it's
yeah.
done
I
with
mean,
people.
definitely. I mean, and I think it's the same thing that, like I said, when I was talking about, reading a novel by an author. If I don't want to say good, because I'm not trying to make a judgment on it, but if they're succeeding in their goals as a creator, when you write a book, you want to write something that tells the story you want to tell and conveys it in the way, in the manner that you're trying to convey it, which is usually a voice of some sort. And I think that is the same for any kind of art, honestly. I mean, if you're a painter or a line illustrator, you're trying to, you may start out as kind of aping somebody else at first, but I think as time passes and you get more used to the process, that you start to develop your own style too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's the same in any sort of artistic endeavor. I think you should. I think that's just something to strive for, is to have your own voice in an artistic medium.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, that makes sense. I certainly have found that in my artistic pursuits, like just painting miniatures, for example. I would just, look at a picture and apply someone else's ideas, but not come up with my own until very, very, very later on. You know,
Yeah.
it took a lot of imitation to have the confidence to like find my own style. And same with writing. I had to read a lot of words before uh, my words really felt like my own rather than a regurgitation of someone else's.
Well,
Um,
like with just to use my own game as an example, that my with my Action Heroes game, I we worked with a single artist on all of the art, which is very unusual for role playing games. Because usually, but this is also, it's a smaller book, so it doesn't really need as much art as like a giant, like a D&D book.
mhm.
I mean, D&D books are just full of art, and so you're going to need more artists working on a project like that. So with um, with my game, it was kind of nice to be able to work directly with the artist on the book, because it I think it helped, with developing that voice for the game, because I was able to work directly with him and get the kind of art that I thought would be demonstrative of what I was trying to do with the game.
Yeah.
I don't really have. I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase it, but yeah, that it's just the two kind of have to go hand in hand to create the kind of the voice or the tone that you're looking for in the overall book, I think. And one thing that I think tends to be a problem in role-playing game art is that a lot of it is, I think, overly static. You see a lot of art that looks posed or composed, and you lose kind of. Role-playing games are a very dynamic medium. You're in your game and you're doing, you know, you're having fights, you're falling in love, you're, you know, exploring worlds. And so I think a lot of there's this thing that I've seen in a lot of role-playing games, and I call it standing on a rooftop art, where you see, and I think it's just because somebody's read too many Batman comic books over the years, but you just get all these like pictures of people standing there kind of posing on a rooftop, and it doesn't really tell you anything about the game. It's like, what am I doing in this game? And if all of the art is showing me photos, not photos, pictures of people just kind of standing around.
Mm-hmm.
So, like when I was working with the artist and doing the art orders on this book, one thing that I told him was to make sure that people were always doing something
Mm-hmm.
in the art, because action was right there on the front of the book. So I wanted the art to be very dynamic. And so that was one of the things. It's like I'm going, no, a couple of times I had like him redraw things. So I'm going, well, no, they're just kind of standing there, and that's not what we want. So
Yeah. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, do you have a favorite artist or illustrator in terms of, people in our industry?
hmm. Um, I wish that's a question I wish you'd ask me in advance, because I'm terrible with names.
Hmm.
I would honestly like to have prepared for that one. I'm trying to think. And I'm drawing a blank. I mean, there's a lot of things I really like, but I am so terrible about people's names that
Yeah. Well,
I
why?
keep getting the artist that I worked with for like 6 months on my game, and I keep getting his name wrong at times because I'm an idiot. But
I get it. I'm terrible with names and birthdays, so this is like,
oh
it's hard for me
God,
to make
yes,
friends because
yeah.
Jesus.
Hey,
If there's
you.
two things you're gonna get right,
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, a lot of it, like I said earlier, I'm a big fan of comics. I've been a comic reader longer than I've been a gamer, and so a lot of what tends to inspire me is a lot of like comic art and comic. I mean, and when you say comic, people tend to think just of the superhero stuff, but there's so much really good like horror comics that are being made. There are really cool fantasy comics. Um, there are these guys that do just some amazing like noir comics, but and the reason for the success of most of them is because they've got really good art.
Yeah, I mean
So
that's kind of a big part of that particular medium.
yeah. Yeah. So, I'm just terrible at remembering who they are. Actually, talking of those lists, it does remind me of one artist's name in particular. Talking about the noir comics, there's an artist named Sean Phillips, and he he works with Ed Brubaker, doing a series of noir comics that are published through Image Comics, and it's a lot of it is just like, people. It's like it's kind of like a comic equivalent of watching a Tarantino movie, but they managed to do it in such a way it's like it's not that it kind of elevates it from just like a bunch of people standing around in a panel. So, but yeah, his name is Sean Phillips, and he's a phenomenal artist, and he's probably one of the better artists I think I've seen of doing just like normal people doing normal people stuff. So
Cool.
But yeah, so I mean, and it's but it because I think the visual aspect of comics being kind of like movies, there's a lot more. They have to have a lot more excitement on the page because otherwise it gets kind of boring quickly. If it's that same problem. If you have the people just kind of all standing around looking grim, and you're like, why in the hell am I reading this book, and why isn't anybody doing anything? So
Totally. Is there a major company in your space, maybe a role-playing game company that focuses more on horror or sci-fi or more comic book inspired kind of role-playing that you think of as like, oh, this is the big company in that arena?
I think for at the very least for horror, for me, the company has to be Chaosium, because, like I said earlier, the first game that I played that wasn't D&D was Call of Cthulhu, and Call of Cthulhu has faults to it, but I mean most role playing games do. But we wouldn't have horror role playing today without Call of Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, games like Vampire may have made it bigger, but I think if Chaosium hadn't been there first with their game, I don't know that somebody would have gone, I wonder if horror would work as a role playing genre, which obviously it does because there's a lot of people doing it.
Yeah.
So, but being the first to try to do something different in a medium that is fairly well known for one thing specifically, like role playing tends to be thought of as fantasy because of the popularity of D&D. Being that first one to go, hey, I want to do a game where there's a really good chance that you're going to die in the first couple of hours of play. That's a big change from even like the older editions of D&D where characters were more fragile. It's like you kind of expected that your character was going to make it through that first scenario at the very least.
Yeah.
May not last much longer than that, but you expected to at least get through that first scenario. With games like Call of Cthulhu, it's like those expectations aren't necessarily true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That makes sense. I had a thought as you were mentioning, like it was unclear before Call of Cthulhu if horror as a genre would really translate well to, role playing around a table. And what I found with people I play Dungeons and Dragons with is that they think they don't like horror. Almost everyone I know that plays D&D thinks that they don't like horror. They think that they don't like that setting. And yet, what's the most popular published 5th edition uh, Dungeons and Dragons adventure. It's Curse of Strahd.
Yeah.
And the reason for it is the atmosphere. It's because it's incorporates horror elements. So it seems to, this is my hypothesis at least. It seems to me that people think they don't like horror, but they when they experience it in a role playing game setting, they do like it. They love it. So I guess a couple questions. Does that kind of drive with your own experience? And, if so, why do you think that might be?
Yeah, I think I would agree because playing a horror game has always been a hard sell, and but I've found that when people do engage with it, well, I mean, obviously they engage with it differently than they would a fantasy game, and I think the fragility of the characters that I mentioned earlier is probably one of those reasons. um, because you can't just approach every situation by jumping at the creature and bludgeoning it until it's dead or unconscious, because that's, in a horror game, typically not going to end well for the person who's trying to leap into combat.
Mm-hmm.
So it causes people to engage with the setting differently than they would, which is a good thing, I think, because I think that is how you probably should approach different genres. If you're just going to play different genres in the exact same way, it's like, why are you bothering playing different genres? But yeah, it's and I think that when people do engage well with a horror game, that their interactions with it tend to be fairly vivid. So you get a lot of you get a lot of like strong memories out of it, because you have the things like, oh my god, I I got jumped by this ghoul, and I screamed, and then I started like hitting it with my flashlight, and and then and it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're in the moment, those kind of things are very heightened. So I think that those are the kind of, they tend to remember like the smaller things than yeah, we had a big fight and there was a bunch of people,
I
and
did 70 damage in one hit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And they're saying, yeah, it was dark and it was wet, and I hit it with a flashlight, and I think I might have cried, but I don't know, but I got out of there, and
Yeah.
So,
Totally.
but which I think is kind of what the fundamental of what you should be taking out of that's the kind of experience you should be having with role playing games. I think, regardless, is just, it's those kind of, those visceral moments when it's like, oh my god, am I going to get through this scene, and what it's, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. There's the nothing like the fear of death to create
Yeah.
a sort of tension that that just commands your
Yeah.
attention, whether it's, reading a George R.R. Martin novel or playing in a, horror inspired or horror based role playing
Yeah.
game.
Which I think is why we're kind of seeing more of it too nowadays. Like you mentioned with the Strahd stuff with D&D. Free League has a role-playing game now based on the universe of the Alien movies. And so I think you're seeing, we're seeing kind of an upswing in in a number of different genres in role playing games, but I think horror is definitely one of the ones that kind of goes to the front a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Switching gears a little bit, are there kind of like some notable challenges that you faced or experienced while playing tabletop role playing games or being a game master for them?
I think I think kind of the biggest challenge in playing RPGs as an adult is being an adult. um, and it would be awesome to have, like, 10 hours to spend on whatever. Well, yeah, I mean, not just role playing. It would be awesome to have like 10 uninterrupted hours to spend on anything, let alone playing a game with your friends. But I think that that tends to be the biggest challenge. It's like I have a weekly group right now, and we didn't play this week because like half the group had family or work or something related things that kept them from coming to the session. So
Yeah, that's so funny. I
yeah,
I've been building software for tabletop role playing games. It's ideally going to be system agnostic and all of that. And I thought I was, you know, building kind of utilities to help make games run faster and smoother. But the ongoing joke between me and my co-founder is that like if we keep listening to these customer interviews, we're going to be building like scheduling software, like not anything else. It's like the most consistent challenge that people face is actually getting the game on the calendar and like handling schedules, which is not what we're gonna do. That is such a common experience that we all have.
yeah.
Um, well, what do you think makes for a really great game master?
Um, I think it's I think it's a combination of having having a big imagination and listening to the people at the table around you, because I mean, like, half the time, no matter how much if I come up with an idea that I'm trying to work towards in a game, and I think it's scary, or you know it's going to grab the players or whatever, it the ideas that the players come up with at the table while interacting with your ideas that aren't completely unveiled yet can sometimes actually be a lot more exciting than the idea that you came up with initially. And I think being able to listen to what the players are doing and going, yeah, maybe I should pivot towards that. Um, or, maybe I should, there's this thing that's making the players really paranoid, that I hadn't actually thought about doing in this game. So maybe I should use some of that.
Mhm.
But I think that is probably the second most important skill that a GM can have is listening to the group and kind of being able to move things as a reaction to what how the players are interacting with the game itself.
Yeah, yeah. I find I do that thing that some game masters do when like the players are worried about something and like, ooh, is this gonna do this or do that? And I like something I had completely hadn't thought of, and I try and not show that at all, and just do the, yeah, perhaps there is a trap underfoot in the hallway forward. You don't know, and whatever. Um,
Yeah, there was this time a few years back I was running a fantasy game, and the group were in this like village out on the edge of civilization thing, and they were, there were creatures coming from somewhere, and they were harassing the people in this town, and they were kind of there on behalf of one of the bigger cities to investigate and, if necessary, kill whatever it was that is causing the stress to these people. And players are often not good at investigating in role playing games, and so the players convinced themselves that there was a conspiracy going on in this town, and all of the important people were somehow involved in these creatures that were attacking their town. And at first I was like, well, that's dumb. Why would the important people in the city be doing this? And then I'm like, but they just kept pushing at it. And I thought, well, okay, maybe that is because I think I was just going to do something fairly like straightforward. But the more they pushed this idea that obviously the important people in this town were trying to destroy their own town, I was like, okay, why would someone do that? And then as I started thinking about their ideas, I go, okay, I guess that does sound more interesting. So I'll just pivot towards having the important people in town being behind all of this. And then they're like, aha, we knew it.
We figured it out.
Yeah.
You tried to keep it a secret from us, Game Master. But,
yeah,
boy,
and
did we show you.
So yeah, I was like, okay. So
that's cool.
But yeah, but I think that's where the kind of that listening comes in, because it's like there are times when the players are just kind of going to take the story in a direction that you weren't planning for, and they're just the more determined they become, it just gets to a point where it's better for everyone that you just kind of go with the flow and decide that, yeah, okay, we'll do it this way.
Yeah.
So
flexibility and listening.
Yeah.
Super important. Or adaptability and listening. What do you think keeps game masters from being their best?
Excuse me. I think in talking about how I think it's important that the game master be someone who listens, I think that the biggest problem then can become getting over yourself, or getting over your story ideas, and realizing that role playing is a group activity, not a GM telling a story activity, and that you kind of have to roll with the input of the players too. I mean, and not just in like I was saying about them being bound and determined that this is the story that you've been telling all along, but it's also the things like one of the for somebody who is a older role player like myself, there's a lot of resistance in my age group towards safety tools in role-playing games. And I think, honestly, that safety tools are probably one of the best things that have happened to role-playing in the last 20, 30 years. And I think that they are an important part of that getting over yourself that I mentioned earlier. It's knowing what's going to make the players in the group uncomfortable, and working around those things rather than just bulldozing right through the things that you want to tell in the story, even if it makes the players uncomfortable. I think that's an important part of the getting over yourself too, is, you know, learning that it's a group activity and everyone is there to have fun, not just you.
Yeah. Yeah. I was newly exposed to, lines and veils and, like these various safety tools and the thought that went into them and had previously not known anything about them. It was just a very foreign concept to me, to be honest. Like, wait, why? Yeah, maybe it's kind of an age thing or something like that, but it just would never occur to me that my own feelings of safety were somebody else's responsibility. Um, but I also think of like how many tabletop role playing games or campaigns have I been a part of that have just had people drop or fallen apart or this or that, and it does make you wonder what happened that was left unsaid by
Yeah.
some players, and getting some of that hashed out preemptively. Maybe that's not such a bad idea.
Yeah, I I don't feel that there is such a thing as like an absolutely safe space, but I don't think that means that you shouldn't try to make your gaming space as safe and comfortable as you possibly can for everyone in the group. And I think that's not the GM has the majority of the responsibility, I think, for doing that. But I think it is something that's it's shared with the group where it's everyone has a responsibility to speak for their own comfort level of things and to realize when they may be doing something that is crossing a line for someone else.
Definitely.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's like, I remember like when some of the early safety tools were coming out in like the late 90s, early 2000s. I remember, when Lines and Veils first came out in like early 2000s. I've taught the designer who was one of the first people to use the terminology Lines and Veils. I've talked with him about game design a couple of times, and we've talked about safety tools, and it's like he was, for him, because he came out of like the vampire world of darkness into, his own designs, and he felt that the intensity of the gaming experience was a very important one. And really the only way that you can push those kind of boundaries is by having safety tools that allow, to have that net that you can like fall into if, you've gone too far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
I totally get it for horror as a setting to like want to establish those things to begin with. But if you're doing something that's like PG-13, it's like, what, would you really need to check and see if giant spiders are okay?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But anyway,
yeah, because my opinions on that have changed dramatically over the years too. Because like you were saying, at first I was like, well, why do we need these things? And I game mostly with my friends, and it's like one of the, and I've mentioned this in like games that I've designed. It's like you never really know everything about your friends, and is it honestly worth risking screwing up a friendship because you had to have some edgy content in your game that you knew there was a good chance that other people wouldn't want to interact with?
mm-hmm.
And is the game worth potentially losing a friendship or a relationship over? And I personally think the answer to that is no, but
I should hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and so that's why kind of coming to the realization of those kind of two things. It's like, my friends are a lot more important than a role playing game, and there are ways that we can do both of these things and not harm someone else is a good thing. So me of like the 80s or 90s would have been, that's a dumb thing. Why the hell would I need something like that? And then but then and it's another thing of being an adult and having to deal with adult constraints, and it's like, why am I wasting time on doing things that's just pissing people in the group off? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, in our remaining 7 minutes, I was hoping to get your feedback on some software that I'm working on.
okay.
Um, so I'm kind of considering a couple different directions on the software that I'm working on. One is a path meant to make it easier to play a tabletop role-playing game, to make it as easy as getting like a board game night together. Since I've talked to a lot of people that I'd say are like TTRPG curious, or D&D curious, but they just haven't kind of quite gotten over that hump. Maybe due to lack of structure, or too many rules, or too much complexity, or no one wants to be the game master, or knows what that entails, or thinks that it's harder than it is, whatever it is. And so that kind of approach, the idea was more you know, allowing for even like a random selection of who is going to be the game master, or kind of a series of questions, and then like picking the person that would be best suited to that for that reason, and then giving the game master kind of very, very light prompts, like right when they need it, and then the ability to kind of like query a set of rules for whatever the game system is that's being played. So you don't have to read the rule book. You just need to say like, oh, what are the rules on whatever, or how does X happen? And then the prompts that they would get are like, a one sentence prompt for an NPC, uh, a a stingy merchant with a sharp tongue, like just like very, very short, enough to them like, okay, I can build off of that, and or like chunks of text to read to like describe an environment, or to set the scene, if you will. So that's the first concept. And then the second concept is more tools for world builders and game masters and like experienced players to do some more advanced stuff, and to take some of the administrative work out of running a tabletop role playing game. And so this second idea is more like, okay, let's record your game when you play it, and let's transcribe it. So you've got a text transcription and record of your game. And then let's summarize it so you can have a recap that you can share for the next time that you play. And then with the context of the games that you have played, allow for idea generation that would fit within your world. So instead of roll on that random treasure table, it's roll on a table that is built for your table. Roll on a table that's built for your group. Your group likes comedy and funny stuff. All right, the magic items that you might find might have that, or we know what the characters' backstories are, so maybe what they find ties into their backstory, or the NPC that they meet ties into their backstory, or anything that gets created or that fleshes out kind of the world is done with the context of who's playing in the game, what they like, what they don't, their backstories, and like the world that's been built so far, as well as obvious things like, okay, what does this character do? What do they like? What do they know how to do? So that stuff that is discovered kind of makes sense. So I'll pause there. Any thoughts or feedback on either of those two concepts?
Honestly, I think, and this probably isn't the helpful answer, but I think that both of the tools would be valid and useful. I mean, I like the idea of, a set of tools for beginners to kind of ease the transition into role playing and, kind of like training wheels almost, to get them kind of going and confident. And then once they're ready to go, they can just, shoot off. And, but I also do like the idea of, having a level of customization and the tools for, more advanced players to kind of enrich their world building too. So I think they're both kind of cool sounding tools. So
Cool.
it's funny that you're talking about, showing like the bits of the rules that as they need them. Because one thing, when I've done like panels at conventions and talked about GMing, one thing I've always said is that you don't, as the GM, it might seem like this is the case from reading the books, but as the GM, you don't actually have to know everything that's in those books.
Yeah.
It's okay to like go, I'm not sure about that. Let me look that up real quick. And I think kind of supporting that kind of mindset at all stages of play, but particularly when you're a beginner and a lot of this seems overwhelming, I think is a good idea.
Awesome. Well, cool.
So
and it may be that these two ideas kind of merge into one down the road.
Yeah.
But you got to start somewhere and pick the features that you're going to be working on.
Yeah. I mean, I think they both have some good ideas to them. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, wrapping up, anything that you'd like to share in terms of, like, say, people are interested in Action Heroes and want to know more, where could they go to find that?
The game itself is available on DriveThruRPG, or you can get it direct from the publisher via their website, Outland Entertainment. Just Google it and it'll take you to them. And I believe that they have store distribution set up, so people should be able to, in theory, go to their store and order it or ask for it or harass somebody until they buy copies, that kind of thing. But yeah, those are the two ways to do that. I also have a Patreon that is www.patreon.com/Dorkland, which is the name of my blog, and I do content for my various games, and I also do that's where I do like my beta development of new systems. So
Got it. Okay, on DriveThruRPG, check out dorkland.com and harass your friendly local game store.
Yes, always harass your friendly local game store to get new games.
You can never go wrong with harassment. No, we're edit that one out. Cool. Well, I really appreciate it. I think that's about all the time we have. But this was, from my perspective, a great conversation. And Christopher, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for having me. It was a good time.